Let me call to order the Williamsport City Council meeting. It is December 15th, our hopefully last meeting of the 2016. Please rise for an invocation by Councilwoman Bonnie Katz, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance.
Twas a night of budget and all through the house. We've listened, analyzed, and worked for the good of all. We've prayed and asked for the Lord's guidance to come up with the best for all. We've decked the halls with good wishes around and a wonderful life for those who are leaving our happy home. And as the night fell silent, we say farewell to some of our friends and colleagues. They will be missed. To everyone else, we pray for peace and prosperity. So Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, and joyous Kwanzaa to all, and to all, a blessed holiday season.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mrs. Katz. Next item on our agenda is approval of City Council meeting minutes dated December 5th, our first budget session. Can I have a motion and a second to approve this?
So move.
Hearing a motion and a second. Comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Nubiello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz? Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and those are approved. Next item on the agenda is limited courtesy of the floor. We've had no requests for that this evening, so we can move along to our next item, which is an ordinance adopting operating budgets for the city in final reading. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
An ordinance adopting various operating budgets for the City of Williamsport, including the General Fund, Utility Fund, WBT Capital Projects Funds, Liquid Fuels Fund, City Hall Operating Fund, WBT Planning, Unemployment Compensation Fund, Debt Service Fund, Trade and Transit Center, Act 13 Fund, and Pool Repairs Capital Fund.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second on that ordinance in final reading, please?
So move.
Hearing a motion and a second. Mr. Nichols, how are you this evening?
Good evening, Mr. President, Vice President, and members of Council. This ordinance on second reading adopts to 12 different operating budgets as read by the City Clerk, and this is for the City of Williamsport budget for 2017. And this ordinance makes the required appropriations for each budget for the next calendar year. As you know, each budget was reviewed by line item at 2 review sessions held last week, and also a week ago the budget was passed on first reading. So therefore the administration asks for your approval of the budget ordinance on second reading.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. It's always good to hear you so chipper and in the holiday spirit.
What holiday?
Are there comments or questions for the budget and final reading? Aye. Mr. Allison.
I just wanted to put the budget in context to the year that we just had. It was a very challenging year in a lot of different ways. There were several big issues, and some of them are ongoing issues, and we've talked about them, but any one of them would have kept us busy, and we all have been busy in our various committees, and in dealing with that, and just the working with the administration and City Hall to get through this year. I think this is a good budget. We all wish there wasn't a tax increase, but we face financial and fiscal responsibilities that we have to meet, and that's just a fact of life, and it's borne out by the small fund balance that drops to the bottom line. I think we did good work on it, and I just want to say it's been a pleasure working with my 6 colleagues on council. I think we've done a good job this year. I know we've done a lot of work outside of these meetings, studying, being informed with agencies and other area levels of government and private sector, as well as nonprofits. We've met with several community leaders to get input on their plans for the future, and that we could help the city move along to be a part of what's going to happen and do our part to make it happen. And I think, yes, we do cooperate. I don't think that's a bad thing. We do vote sometimes together, but that's not because we come in that way. It's because we've discussed, we've researched, we've gotten the answers from individually that we need answered, and we individually come to the same conclusion because our judgment is based on what's best for the community, what's best for the city of Williamsport, and what is going to fit in with the things that we see happening and coming down the pike, as well as meeting the responsibilities that we look down the road towards, that we're going to have to meet and pay the piper for in either dollars or different commitments. And we've seen a lot of good things happen this year. I think people, citizens, voters feel secure. I think they feel confident when they see a group of people being able to work together. And I've had a lot of comments over the past 2 or 3 years about just that. People saying, you know, it's refreshing to see council working together, not having personal conflicts with each other, but really digging in and doing the city's business. So I'm proud of my colleagues and the work that's being done, and I look forward to 2017 being more the same, and as we close this year in this budget. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Are there further comments or questions? Mr. Noviello.
Just to kind of echo Mr. Allison's statements for a moment, I would suggest that we're sort of in a period of transition over the last year and presently, even as we're speaking. I see we're probably looking at a new HR director tonight, which is, again, new for us. We don't have what I would call a new fire chief, but we have new leadership in the fire department. We have new leadership in the police department. We have new leadership in streets and parks. I think that what we're seeing here is good working relationships with all those individuals within the administration. A lot of work certainly on the committees that I've been involved in over the last several years. I think what we're seeing is a sort of a funneling of new ideas, new perspectives into the mix of things that we've been dealing with for some time now, which puts a new face on some older issues. And with some new thoughts and new ideas, I think we're kind of headed in the right direction in that regards. I think that these new ideas, new perspectives, and new points of view that we're getting from these new leaders are going to pay some positive dividends as we go down the line here over the next, particularly over the next year, because it's going to be a sort of a feel-out year for all those individuals, I guess. And so I'm happy for the continued cooperation, the courtesy and respect that I certainly get from all those department heads and from everyone in the administration. I'd like to end the year for myself on a positive note, that being that I'm looking forward to further and better communication with all those individuals and all those people that they themselves have to contend with that ultimately find themselves in many cases in front of council for various requests and hopes and ideas. So, you know, I'm happy for the coming closing of this year, but also just as happy to see the new year on the way with some fresh faces doing some fresh things. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Noviello. Other comments or questions? Ms. Mealy.
Just to echo what what both Randy and Don have said. I guess this is as good a moment to do that as any. It really has come to be a pleasure to spend time with my colleagues on City Council and to disagree with them and to agree with them in both cases respectfully. We don't all see everything in the city eye to eye, but I know, or in the same light, but I know that we all have the best interest of the city at heart, and it's an exciting thing to work with 7 people who you know, 6 people, excuse me, and me, who you know are really looking for the best things in Williamsport, and to work with an administration that has been, we've seen a lot of new faces over the last couple of years, and there are a lot of really exciting things that are happening both in city government and in the city. So I'm looking at the next year, and we have tons of potential in Williamsport. We have a project both in Park Avenue and a project on East 3rd Street that I think hold a lot for us in the coming year, and I am excited to work with everyone in the city to try and make 2017 an even better year than 2016 has been. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mealy.
I just wanted very quickly, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I forgot to
Mr.
mention
Dorial.
we have a new recreation director as well, who has done some good things at the same time in a very short period of time, I might add. So I just want to make sure I got that in before I got.
Absolutely. Other comments or questions? Without repeating what was said by the other 3, which I agree entirely with, the challenges that face Williamsport are the challenges that are very similar to many other communities across the country. Some of that is budgetary, some of that is crime, some of that is finding a way to be successful and move forward in an ever-changing world. Over my time on council, we've tried that in a lot of different ways, and I think what my 6 colleagues and I have realized is the only way that really works is through quality communication. Quality communication comes in the form of listening and speaking. It comes in the form of drained cell phone batteries and hours asking questions and listening to the answers, both with members of the administration, with each other, and with other stakeholders in our community and beyond. I think that the council as a body and the individuals involved have gotten better at communication over my time. I know that a couple of us who have been here on the longest have gotten better at communication with each other over that period of time, and I appreciate all of the communication that I have with each of you and with the others that I'm asking questions and listening to the answers for. Back to the budget for a second. I agree with Mr. Allison. This is a good budget. And I don't know if he intended it exactly this way. I would say it's not a great budget. And it's not a great budget because of the constraints that we're faced with, that come from our past, that come from external forces, that come from the reality of being a third-class city in Pennsylvania, under the rules that we work. That has meant more, in my time on council, has meant more difficult choices than I would have ever anticipated, and those choices come in the form of doing what the public expects or paying more in taxes, I'm sorry, not paying more in taxes, and finding that right balance changes from day to day and from year to year. I think this does it fairly well. Even said, we're going to start the year with $1.4 million. Last week's, our changes increased how the dollars that will be left at the end of the year to $177,000. That still means we have a deficit spending plan of about almost, $1.25 million. We've been able to maintain the services and try to make some slight improvements to various services through what the administration has proposed and the actually fairly limited changes that we made last week. But ultimately, that is the challenge that faces every year. What do you do? Do you do less or do you pay more? Ask the taxpayers to pay more. And doing less is undesirable and paying more is undesirable. And finding the balance is our job. And the only way we get it anywhere close to being right is through quality communication. And last week we spent, I didn't exactly, Mrs. Frank probably knows to the minute, 8 hours, something like more than that in public meetings, not including committee meetings. And then I know I spent probably 2 or 3 times that again, talking to members of the administration, talking to the public, and calling each and every one of my colleagues, talking to them, asking questions, hearing questions, getting answers, communicating those answers to others. Did we get it right? We won't know. Could we have gotten it better? We won't know. But I think Mr. Allison was right. It's good. Now we got to make it better. If not tonight, tomorrow, and the next day, and every day after that. And that's going to be a collaboration and communication in an ongoing way, right? Every year we hopefully get more money in than we planned and spend less money than we planned. Bill Nichols has been a master at helping do that. And he's taught a lot of other people in the administration on how to do that. And we've encouraged it and tried to applaud it when appropriate. But right now it's $1.25 million of what's needed to just hold steady. And then we'll face it again next year, and then we'll face it again the year after that. So I don't exactly know how to close that off, but those are some of the challenges we face, and I think the communication that we've achieved is one piece of the solution. So thank you, colleagues, for that. Other comments or questions? Ms. Mealy.
We were trying to end it on a high note, Jonathan.
Thank you. I said thank you.
No.
La, la, la,
But I
la,
think
la.
you raise an excellent point, though. I think communication is what you might well term the first step to beginning to talk about the much harder issues and communicate about the much more complex areas, such as the fact that, frankly, it's not just a $1.4 million gap to maintain our spending, but our fund balance should be, I believe, something in the neighborhood of $3 million.
Right.
Not 1.4. So.
That was my attempt to be positive.
Yeah. I'm just, how bad do you want me to get? Anyway, but while we recognize that, I think it's also important to recognize that, to a certain extent, we are on an upswing. Williamsport got fortunate that we didn't lose a lot during the recession because we had a small gas boom rate when we would have sort of taken it as hard as the rest of the country did. But it was our job then, and it is our job now to try and move that into something that sustains the city in the long run, and we didn't do it then, and hopefully we can do it over the next few years. And I suppose that's a challenge that those of us who are on city council need to make to ourselves and need to make to everyone else in the room. So, thank you.
And to meet your challenge of trying to end on a good note, I too am excited about 2017 because we've got several initiatives that will not only maybe begin to change the fundamental problems that this budget faces, but also increase the quality of life and the opportunities for the residents of the city, the people who work here and the people who love to come to Williamsport to play. It starts, I think, in the 2 projects you were talking about on East 3rd Street and the Park Avenue neighborhood, and it continues in some of the other initiatives that, we don't need to necessarily list tonight, but I've worked with each of you on laying the groundwork for, and they're pretty exciting. And I look forward to the partners that we've been developing in the private sector and the nonprofit sector to bring some of those things to fruition. If there are no further, Mr. Smith?
Just want to make a quick comment that in listening to these different things, I feel that there has been some commenting on the fact that, well, why aren't we up here till midnight fighting among ourselves? And, one of the things that I when people ask me outside, one of the things that I say, you know, how does council work together? And I said, well, there's so many of us on council that have different areas of expertise, you know, and I respect those areas of expertise that other people have on this council. You know, I'm not going to go into them, but Bonnie has a downtown association, works with that. Liz does the landscaping and streetscaping and the historic area. Well, that's not my expertise. It isn't really for me to sit here and argue with things that she comes up with when that's not my area of really what things that I know about and don't do every day. And other people, you know, have areas of expertise. And I think that's one of the reasons, you know, we kind of respect each other's areas. And we have a lot of very knowledgeable people on city council. And the reason I say it is there was a professor I had in college one time said, you know, every now and then you have to pat yourself on the back because sometimes nobody else will. Well, I'm not patting myself on the back, I'm patting the members of council. And I think this is one of the reasons why you don't see us up here fighting among each other. That's not what this is about. It's about working for the taxpayers and the citizens of the city in their best interest. And that doesn't mean for us to be up here debating and fighting among ourselves. It's about having respect for the other people that we work with on council, respecting their expertise. And I don't know about previous councils, but I know that we've got a lot of people on this particular council that have areas that they're very, very good in. And, you know, I respect my colleagues of what and they respect my opinions on things that I feel that I'm knowledgeable on. And I think that's what makes it work. And work in a normal fashion of time rather than wasting time and time and time. And we get a lot done in committee meetings. I know the Finance Committee does, and the ERC Committee, and our committees. And they're all public. Anyone can come. They can make comments. But that's where a lot of the work is done, at the committee level, so that we're not up here till 12, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And I know some folks may think, well, you know, you come here 2, 3 times a month and spend a couple hours. You know, that's the least amount of what we do. Most of our time is doing research in committee meetings and work sessions, putting things together so that when we come here, we have a cohesive policy put together so that we don't try to work the nuts and bolts here till 2 o'clock in the morning. We've done our homework. The people that are on the committees have done their homework. Then they bring it to the full council. And that's where, if there are debates to be had, that's where it happens. So, you know, I feel really good about the council that we've got. I think we've all worked very hard, and we do. We have a good administration. We have a lot of good people that we work with. Working on the committees, we couldn't accomplish what we do without those folks, without their input. They're very good people to work with. They're easy to work with. And that makes life go a whole lot easier. So, you know, I want to thank those folks for this year, what they've done in helping us, and the remainder on council of how we've got a lot of things accomplished. And as you pointed out, every year it's harder. This is not easy. Trying to do with the dollars we have. If you want to look and see the tax exemptions we had this year, business and industry have come in, they've got reassessed. We're not getting those taxes that we got previously. So we're dropping in some areas with the income, but yet we've got expenses. We have union contracts. We have costs that we can't control. We can only do so much with utility costs. It was questioned, are we doing everything we can with lighting? Yeah, we have done a lot with lighting. Our traffic lights are all LEDs. We have LEDs in a lot of other places. So it's not like we're not doing anything, but there comes a point when, what do? Turn off the lights and bring candles in? I mean, you have to have the bare minimum, and that's what we're trying to do, to serve the taxpayers and the residents at the lowest cost possible. So I just want to thank all of those that have made a good year in working with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. If there are no other comments or questions, Mrs. Frank on the ordinance and final reading, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Nubiallo.
Yes.
Mr. Smith.
Yes.
Mrs. Katz.
Yes.
Mr. Henderson.
Yes.
Mr. Allison.
Yes.
Dr. Williamson.
Yes, and the ordinance is approved in final reading. Next item on the agenda is ordinance of the city fixing the tax rate. Mrs. Frank, in short form, please.
An ordinance of the City of Williamsport, County of Lycoming, and the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania fixing the tax rate for all city purposes for the year 2017.
Thank you. Can I have a motion and a second for this ordinance in final reading, please?
So move.
Hearing a motion and a second. Mr. Nichols, anything further to add?
No, other than this sets a tax rate for next year, which translates to $14.72 per 1,000 taxable real estate in the city of Williamsport. I think of interest is that the real estate tax represents 50% of the income required to fund the city Williamsport's operating budget. And there are over 50 line items that fund the other half of the city budget. And of those 50 line items, all except for a couple are regulated by law, and really no one has any control over. So I too, and I know I speak for the mayor, this was really one of the best budgets I've had the privilege to work on, and all the hard work that went into it, and to end up with only a quarter of $1 million to fund a $25 million budget with tons of pressures on it, from wages to health care to pensions to just everything that goes into the operation of the city is pretty remarkable. So again, the mayor and I thank everybody involved for all their hard work.
Thank you. Comments or questions from members of council?
Just
Mr. Allison.
related to that, Mr. Nichols, you've addressed before, we're going to face some challenges in the near future with our pension costs, but at some point, there is going to be some relief in that. Could you just briefly address?
Well, the way the pension, the MMO is derived from three components. It's the normal cost, which you would have in any case to fund your pension fund actuarially, to make it actuarially sound. Then you have what's the unfunded part of it, which I like to liken it to a mortgage payment to make up for, what was not invested in the past or where we didn't meet our assumptions in a given year. And then you have an administrative cost in terms of our pension managers. But once the pension mortgage, so to speak, is paid off, then that's a significant part of your MMO, which represents well over $2 million right now. So, that will be quite remarkable once we're able to get through that and save the equivalent of about $3 million of taxes. The other good news is we just had a quarterly pension review, and our pensions this year through, I think, the 13th of December have investment gains of about 9 to 10%, which is well in excess of our assumptions.
Right.
So the next valuation, every 2 years you have to value your pensions and lock in that number for Act 205 purposes. So if we can stay, 10 or 11% as of 1/1/17, that will be a tremendous help to the MMO. So that's really good news. So
Yes.
again, as we pay down the mortgage, investment returns are favorable. That's really going to have a very positive benefit to the city's budget.
And how far out are we on paying that down?
The mortgage?
Yeah.
About 200 years.
Bill's Bob humbug.
Is that a moving target?
Well, it depends. If, let's just say, 2015 was, we had very poor returns. So how much we missed our targets, then that was added to the mortgage payment. So this year, presumably, we're going to have a very positive year, so there'll be excess revenue that'll pay down the mortgage. So there's some times each year you add to the mortgage, sometimes you pay more than what you have to pay. So I know just a couple years ago, part of the mortgage dropped off because it was paid. And typically, when you don't make your assumptions or whatever, then it's based on a 15-year amortization period. So if we met all our targets going forward, in 15 years, it would be paid off. But bits and pieces will be paid off prior to that as we
Right, which
move
helps
along.
the
So-
bottom
which
line all
helps, right.
along the way.
Right.
So hopefully, we're going to do all we can, the administration is, and they always do a good job at that, of bringing in costs under control, and we're going to do what we can as council people to help on our end with keeping the spending down. And then, so if some of these things break our way, just so that the taxpayers know there is light at the end of the tunnel. And we were able to reduce the 0.35 tax increase this year down to 0.25. And I'm not going to say it's palatable because everybody's feeling a pinch these days, but hopefully things will be better in the future, and the taxpayers will see some relief there. Thank you.
And we just, to add a note, we have one of the better funded pension plans in the Commonwealth. We're in the first tier, so to speak. And right now, if we were totally funded, we would have assets valued at about $100 million. And right now, as of the 13th of December, they're valued at $85 million.
We're
So,
close.
I mean, you hear a lot of horror stories when
Yeah.
they're only funded 1/3 or 50%, but we have a very strong pension plan, even though, there's a lot of, talk about it and problems with it, but we're certainly well ahead of most third-class cities.
A couple thoughts on all of that. It is good to be in the position that we're in, and I think over the years that I've been on council, that fiscal approach of trying to make progress on past errors in fiscal judgment and still be responsible for today's taxpayer and tomorrow's taxpayer has yielded progress on these kind of things. Unfortunately, as I was saying earlier, the structural issues that, tie our hands largely out of Harrisburg, some out of Washington, make that difficult to keep doing regardless of how good we are at trying to find that balance. The pensions, the retiree health care costs, some of the things we'll be talking about later in terms of current costs are all a big part of it. I think an important part that shouldn't be missed on this particular ordinance connected to the tax rate is, last year we had a very large tax increase, one that gave me and probably all of my colleagues a lot of heartburn, and the taxpayers even more, trying to find a way to pay for it this year. In this budget, one of the things I've thought about, had a few conversations about, is, hey, you could make the numbers work. You could make this a zero tax increase budget if you squeezed even harder. But in the end, what you would have is this $177,000 that we're going to end the year with as even less, already irresponsibly low, because of all the pressures that we have. Not that's the wrong word. It's too low for what should be the flexibility, that the reason you want a fund balance. It's as responsible as we can be, but it's not where it should be. But if we had zero tax increase, it would be even lower. We would have made larger cutbacks in some of the expenses that we were able to fund, which translate into services that we provide to the community. We may have laid off personnel, which provide the services that the community depends upon and expects. And in the end, the real big difference is next year's budget would have looked worse. We don't know what next year's budget is going to look like exactly, but we know what the pressures will be. And so, to me, the responsible thing is to not just think about that being a zero change, this year, but to think about whatever change it's going to be, whether it be zero or something larger, what the implication is for 2017, 2018, 2019, and as far out as we can project in a reasonable manner, and spread the costs and the changes in the tax rate out in a way that doesn't hurt as much, but provides the services that people expect over that same time frame. We want to make sure that we do as good a job as possible paving the roads in 2017 and in 2018, 2019, 2020. Have funds to have a police force that we are more and more proud of every day in 2017, 18, 19, 20, et cetera, and replicate that in every department and every service we provide.
Another way to look at it, if you take, the 0.25, a quarter of 1 mil, in 4 years, that will generate the equivalent of 1 mil. So if you didn't do that, then in 4 years, you need a mil to make up for not implementing the quarter of a mil this year. If you follow what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So, because of the compounding effect. So even though it's a very, very small tax increase, some have argued, well, we shouldn't have any. But then, like I said, if there's no tax increase and if you look 4 years out, that's 1 mil that we would have to make up.
And so short-sighted decision-making is how we
Will cost
got
you
into some of
considerably
these.
more in the future.
Right. Short-sighted decision-making is how we've gotten into some of the jams that we're now faced with dealing with on behalf of the taxpayer. We're trying to be long-sighted, and a lot of the conversations that I have are about how do you find the short-term right answer and balance that out with the long-term right answer. So thank you for that comment. Other comments or questions? Hearing none, Mrs. Frank, on the ordinance and final reading, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Noviello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that ordinance is approved in final reading. Next item on the agenda then is resolution for workers' compensation insurance. Mrs. Frank, please.
Resolution for Workers' Compensation Insurance Policy Year 1117 through 1118. Be it hereby resolved by the City Council of the City of Williamsport that the appropriate city officials are hereby authorized to execute a workers' compensation insurance policy as follows. Policy, workers' compensation. The carrier is AmeriHealth United Wisconsin. The broker is Sims Insurance, and the premium is $454,825.
Thank you. Could I have a motion and a second on this resolution, please?
So move.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second, Mr. Nichols.
Thank you. Again, this resolution is to approve the necessary workers' comp insurance policy for the City of Williamsport's 2017 budget year. The Sims agency was able to secure a renewal quote from the city's current carrier for workers' comp. This is within the approved 2017 budget, and actually the premium is slightly less than what we've paid this year. Also, the city administration is working with our insurance consultant as it relates to non-workers' comp insurance policies, and that is, we're working with the Henry Dunn Agency, and we look to bring that resolution to City Council at your first meeting in January.
Thank you, and this was reviewed by
What's that?
Finance.
I'm sorry?
Did this go through Finance?
Workers' comp, yes.
Yes, okay. Thank you. Ms. Mealy, Finance review, please.
Finance did review this and passed it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. It was hard not to positively recommend something that was $13,000 lower than last year, that being kind of a rare experience here. However, we did ask, obviously, we will be seeing the remainder of our insurance coverage at the beginning of the year. Most of our discussion centered around the recommendation that we'd all discussed earlier in the year given the dust-up that happened mid-2015, excuse me, with our insurance, that we should perhaps take the whole package out for bid. That did not happen this year, even though there had been an understanding that that would happen. And consequently, it was Finance's recommendation that the administration look strenuously at, or work strenuously, I suppose, at putting both insurance, both insurance packages, or our entire insurance package, out for bid in 2017. There's certainly nothing wrong with the rates that we're getting. You know, there's, well, obviously, we'll see what's coming with the rest of the coverage in January, but nothing wrong with this package, but it would simply seems like it might be a wise idea for us to periodically take such items out and just see what's out there. As Mr. Nichols did point out, there are not very many carriers that would cover our workman's comp. You know, it's unlikely, I think, that we would change, perhaps that we would change carriers, but it would nonetheless be worthwhile. My understanding is it's a paid fire department issue, right, Bill?
That's correct. It's Pennsylvania under workers' comp designated that any firefighter that was diagnosed with cancer is presumed to be a job injury, so to speak, or related to their job. So with that presumption in there, a lot of the companies dropped out of carrying cities that included a paid fire department. So United Wisconsin is one. There's also the state pool, but that would be considerably more. But it's a pretty limited market, and I know that our experience modification and our experience in general has been excellent. So we're in a good position in terms of getting renewals.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Mr. Smith?
I was noting on here, Mr. Nichols, under the AmeriHealth line items, number 985, police or firefighters. And we just finished talking about the budget and how difficult it is to really balance the budget, but I see that under line item 951, we are now covering with workman's comp an outside salesman. So when did we put that in, and when does that outside salesman start?
Okay, I'm lost. What page are you talking?
Last page
Last page?
Yeah.
Of the,
No.
of the SEMS proposal.
See, it says item number 951, outside salesman. So are we going to hire salesmen to market the city? I think this is a great idea. And we're going to cover them under workman's comp. When does he start or she start?
I'm not sure. They have designated categories for employees, and I'm not sure which one, you know, what salary those are, whether it be recreation or whatever, but it's, you have certain categories, you got to plug the, you know, the people into those categories because there are set modification, experience modification rates, so I'm not sure which
So you're-
employees are considered in there, but I don't think it's...
You're telling me we don't have an outside salesman?
No,
Oh,
that's a
I was
certain-
very disappointed. I thought we were going to have an outside salesperson working for the city.
I think that that's Justin Ray's salary, so I think that's what that
Salary plus commission?
is. Plus commission, yes.
Okay.
We can find what that, who's included in that. I guess I'd be interested who's included in that myself.
Yeah, because like I say, if we're going to have an outside salesman, I think this is great. That we're going to go out and sell the city and bring in extra dollars from that salesperson. Good idea. That was a smart part on
I thought that was
that you
very,
did,
I thought
Mr.
that
Nickel.
was a brilliant
brilliant.
part of the, yeah.
Okay.
We'll be here all week. Any other comments or questions? I have just one thought, and I've expressed to you this outside of public meetings, so let me just express it to you here again. Like it sounds like the discussion at Finance went, is disappointed that the time ran out in 2016 to complete their council's request that we do a full bidding process. I know you initiated one, but as we said, the timing ran out. And the price may not vary, especially on workers' comp because of lack of the competition. The price might vary on the other insurances a bit more for reasons that we've discussed. The review of our insurance needs that we've also discussed is really a big part of why you want to bid it out on a periodic basis. And then, of course, customer service. It's not that you have problems with SIMS or other insurance brokers. It's that you create a transparent process that every company who provides this particular set of services has the opportunity to bid for and make a case for why they are better going to serve the taxpayers of the city than what the city currently has. And so it has been some time since we've done that. And that time frame plus I think Ms. Mealy's word for it was dust up a year ago is why council asked that to happen. And on my behalf, and I think on the behalf of my colleagues, I asked that we start that process much earlier in 2017, and that through the Finance Committee, I'd ask that committee to ask for monthly updates on the status of the RFP process and the bidding process and the review of our needs and then the pricing for 2018, so that council can be assured that action is occurring in January and February and March and April, so that by the time we get to November, when the next budget, well, August and September when it's started put together, and then November when it becomes part of these public discussions, that we know what the 2018 number is, and we know that we've had a transparent process where all of the companies who are in that marketplace have had the opportunity to make their pitch in the process. And I know you've heard me say that before, but I wanted to put it on record. Thank you. If there are no further comments on the resolution, Mrs. Frank, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Nubiallo?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and the resolution passes. Next
Thank
item,
you.
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. Next item on the agenda is resolution approving an agreement between the City of Williamsport and the FOP Lodge. Mrs. Frank, please.
Resolution agreement between the City of Williamsport and the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 29. Be it resolved by the City Council of the City of Williamsport that the agreement attached hereto, a collective bargaining agreement between the City of Williamsport and the City Employees Fraternal Order of Police Lodge Number 29 is hereby approved, and the appropriate city officials are hereto authorized and directed to execute said agreement. Highlights of the agreement. Management rights clause.
Mrs. Frank, that'll be fine, but we'll give Chief something to talk about there. Can I have a motion and a second to approve the resolution, please?
So moved.
Second. Carry a motion and a second. Chief Young, how are you this evening?
Good evening, Mr. President, council members. Before using a resolution regarding the agreement between the City of Williamsport and the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 29 from January 1st, 2017 through December 31st, 2020. If I could, some of the highlights of the agreement are the management rights clause, a flexible patrol shift, a 3% raise for each year, health care remains at its current status, holiday pay for the 8 identified holidays, improved sick leave policy, adjustments to use of comp time, the resolution of an unfair labor practice for the agent's on-call status, the resolution to early post-retirement health care, and a resolution to the parking grievance. This was presented to the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Chief. Ms. Mealy?
This was reviewed by the Finance Committee and forwarded to the full body of council with a positive recommendation. I believe that most of us are familiar with, a number of the changes to the contract this year, but I think that Finance that being Randy and I, in this case, generally agreed that this was a positive step for the city. The flexible patrol shift element, I think Chief Young believes will add a lot of benefit for the department. And in addition, we have a handful of things, holiday pay that I think is probably long overdue within the department, especially just as an incentive to work holidays for our officers. And generally speaking, while as it's meant to be, while the city may not have gotten everything at once in the negotiations, we got a number of good things, and I think everyone will walk away from the agreement relatively content. We did have some additional discussion centering around new hires, the status of our current hiring list, and retirements that are pending in January, and a little bit of discussion surrounding Act 120 certification and whether or not the next hiring list would would require that of incoming applicants or not. I know that there was some discussion of some legal things we wanted to look into vis-a-vis this contract and the Act 120 training requirements. But aside from that, we like the look of things and forward it to the full body of council with a positive recommendation.
Thank you very much. Comments or questions from members of council? Mr. Novielli.
Chief, I know that we've spent some time at our subcommittee meetings discussing some of these issues. As I brought some of these issues to the attention of taxpayers and such, we get some conversations going back and forth. One of the things I seem to have a more difficult time trying to explain to them is the Flex Patrol. Can you give us sort of a thumbnail sketch on that while we've got some TV audience available to us?
Sure. Currently, under the current agreement that we're under, there's 3 biddable shifts: the midnight shift, the AM shift, and the PM shift. The flex shift is an additional shift to that biddable process, and it contains 8 members if we're at a complement of 51, 6 patrol officers and 2 corporals. The other 3 shifts that I previously spoke about are shifts that are bid, and I cannot change that shift. The flex shift, I am able to maneuver any one of those 8 people into sick leave, vacation, special events, trends, crime trends, seeing something in an area. I can deploy them somewhere on a Friday night if I know, our trends are showing high crime on a Friday night. Grand Slam Parade, July 4th. It enables me to move those officers around without having to pay them overtime, as I would currently do under the current agreement.
So in essence, then, we're saying we have a really good opportunity here to cut down on overtime hours.
I would hope so, pending any major incidents. Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments or questions? Mr. Smith.
And looking over this contract compared to the previous one, I think that the city has gained a lot, and I think the union has gained a lot. I think in looking at this seems to be a really win-win situation for both the union and for the city. And I want to thank those that were involved with the city administration and also with the FOP Lodge number 29 in coming to this agreement. It's always nice to be able to come to an agreement without having to go to arbitration, because we all know that we can spend anywhere from 40 to 50, 60,000 plus on both sides, the union and the city, and that money can be used obviously for better purposes in the city. So I just want to say thank you for all the hard work that's been put into this, Chief. And also, there's not a union official that I see here, but please convey our thanks to them also for the good negotiations that occurred with this contract.
Thank you. I'd like to also thank the mayor and Bill and Joe for their guidance initially regarding the negotiations, since I'm somewhat new here. But their initial guidance with this agreement made it actually made the ball start rolling. And we worked hard, long hours on it. But like you said, I believe it's good not only for the city of Williamsport and the taxpayers, but also good for the police department itself.
Other comments or questions? Oh, Mr. Allison.
That we, following up on Councilwoman Mealy's comments, that we the things we looked at in Finance Committee, and we talked about the sick policy and sick leave and how that's being adjusted for more control. There's a lot of would seem like smaller things in here that are going to pay benefits as far as control in the future of costs. And I think it speaks well of a new tenor in our department and a new cooperation with management in the rank and file. And Liz mentioned this, that we talked about the number of officers, and the chief told us that in 2017 we're going to have 27 officers with less than 3 years or less of experience. So that's over half, well over half our force. That's a big transition, but it's a good one. And the chief has, along with this, has put in a new structure in the department that we're seeing a sea change, I believe, with this contract and the changes the chief has made and his guidance that we're going to have over the department. And I think that's going to produce benefits across the board throughout our community. And you're to be commended, Chief, and Mayor Campan and the administration for working hard on these things. It's a big plus.
Thank you. I look forward to a new direction that we're currently hopefully moving towards from the past, and put the past behind us and move forward in a positive direction that would benefit not only my officers, but the service that they provide.
Says it all.
Other comments or questions? Mayor?
Good evening, everyone. First of all, I'd like to thank City Council in regards to the recommendation from the Finance Committee in regards to this proposed contract. I appreciate the positive comments made tonight in general in regards to the budget. It seems like it's refreshing that we're on the same page, at least this evening, and hopefully in 2017 we can continue that progress. I'd like to also publicly thank the FOP. It was a very positive experience in regards to negotiations. I believe there is a new beginning in this department with new management, and we're going to continue to work very, very hard to make the city safer. And with this contract, we have the ability to put more police officers on the street, and that's a key. Thank you.
One thought that I'd like to add in all of this is that, piggybacking on something Mr. Smith, two thoughts. Something Mr. Smith said. A year ago, I can remember having conversations with members of the administration and the police leadership at the time and with members of council, and we said, and my sense of things is we were looking at 80 and 90% chance of arbitration. Well, the big change between then and now, I think, is Chief Young and his very professional, even-keeled approach to these things. I'm guessing that played a big role in making the change. And so I want to particularly express my appreciation for that. The dollars saved are a big piece of avoiding arbitration and why we want to do that. But the other big piece is I've seen the effects of arbitration on morale, on productivity, on basically just the attitudes of everyone involved on both sides for an extended period of time. It's not an easy process, and so you're to be commended, and the FOP's willingness to open their ears and express their ideas anew are a big part of that. The other thought that I have about the contract itself is goes back to something I said earlier. Look, council and I think all of us are trying to accomplish two things: better services at as low a cost, reduced cost to the taxpayer as possible. This contract does that in big ways. it's not, as Ms. Mealy said, not everything that we would have liked to seen is here, but that's the process. But the better services will come from the flex shift idea that you described. We are going to be able to allocate, you are going to be able to allocate our resources in a much more proactive way, responding to needs, and not having your hands tied to a contract that really doesn't allow any kind of planning and allocation of resources based on events and based on data, empirical evidence. And that's a big improvement in terms of the quality of the service we can provide to the taxpayer. And then in the cost side, there's the cost savings of that very provision. When you put it on paper, management's rights clause, it doesn't sound like much. But it is, we saw it in the budget. We can measure the likely effect that it will have in the coming years in terms of dollars. And then I think those savings offset clearly, you have to have cost of living adjustments, and I think given the big benefit the city and its taxpayers will receive, the cost of living raises that are in here make sense. The healthcare, post-retirement healthcare benefit that the taxpayers receive then get offset, help to offset the costs of what are common sense holiday pay requirements. And you could go down the list and say, hey, we're getting quality improvements in the services that we're going to be able to provide, and we're doing it in a way that is as affordable as we can given state level rules. And everyone's commended for that, and I think it's a very, very positive outcome. And then above and beyond that, the cultural changes that people have talked about. It's an optimistic time looking forward for your department, Chief. So thank you for that. If there are no further comments, then Mrs. Frank on the resolution.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that resolution is approved. Next item on the agenda is a resolution authorizing execution of maintenance services agreement. Mrs. Frank, please.
A resolution authorizing the execution of the maintenance services agreement between the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Department of Transportation and the City of Williamsport for the maintenance of the sloped area of Miller's Road.
That'll be fine. Thank you. May I have a motion and a second on this resolution, please?
So moved.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second. Mr. Silva, how are you this evening?
Very good, thank you. Good evening, Dr. Williamson, members of council, and just to piggyback off what you mentioned, I haven't known Chief Young for very long, but I'm getting to know him better, and he is a great asset to the city. We're happy to have him aboard. So,
Thank you.
anyway, you have a resolution authorizing the execution maintenance services agreement between PennDOT and the City of Williamsport to maintain the sloped area of Miller's Run, Miller's Run being the area kind of behind St. Anne's Church that runs over to the Washington Boulevard area. On August the 4th, there was a resolution passed by council for a new 3-year contractual agreement to maintain that. Since that point, we got a letter from their legal counsel, as you probably have a copy of, stating that there's no changes to the agreement per se, just a renumbering. If you had looked at your paper, there was an ABC line item under number 9. That falls under number 8 now. So there's no changes to the monetary agreement, no changes to the language of the agreement, just that simple change. And after poring over this for several hours at Public Works and Finance, it was passed on to council with a full recommendation.
Thank you. Mr. Smith from Public Works.
Wait a minute. This went through Public Works as fast as lightning.
We expect a full rehash.
We told him he got off easy in your committee, so we made him sit around.
Oh, you made up for that, okay. As Mr. Sillo said, you know, somehow A, B, and C got under 9 instead of 8. No other changes were made. We passed it with a positive recommendation to full council for their approval. Swift, over, done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Mealy?
Ditto.
Thank you. Any other?
Expression of our faith in Mr. Sillo.
Other comments or questions? One thing just I want to add, because I've never been able to say this publicly, and it connects to your department and sort of to Miller's Run. It does. In addition to this particular regional arrangement, really, which I know a lot of us like to see those opportunities for cooperation. One of the things I learned about this year was from Mr. Markley out of your department about what other responsibilities the city has in the Millers Run area, in particular in a flood event. I understand it on an annual basis, I think. There is a flood exercise that involves something that I always wondered what it was, but didn't have any clue. And apparently there's 2 of these in the city, but one on Washington Boulevard at Millers Run, where in a matter of moments, I think it is, we set up a flood barricade that crosses Washington Boulevard at the bridge at Millers Run. And erects a barrier that blocks vehicle access, but more importantly, blocks floodwaters from crossing that barrier, and is an annual exercise to make sure that we can do it fast, effectively, and the whole mechanism very much works. And please pass along to him my appreciation for helping him showing me photos and videos of that exercise, and to better understand the city's role in that process.
Sure.
Doesn't directly apply, but I couldn't find anywhere else over the course of the last 6 months to be able to put that on record either.
All right.
So pass along my thanks, and if others on council are interested, we can make arrangements for them to understand that process as well.
Sure.
If there are no further comments on this resolution, Mrs. Frank?
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that resolution is approved. Wow. That brings us to the next item on the agenda, which is accept for filing. We have one controller's report for 2016. I haven't missed anything, have I? No? Can I have a motion and a second to accept that report for filing?
So move.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second. Any comments or questions? Hearing none. Mrs. Frank, please.
Ms. Mealy?
Yes.
Mr. Novello?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Katz?
Yes.
Mr. Henderson?
Yes.
Mr. Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Williamson?
Yes, and that item is approved. Next item on the agenda is announcements. We're going to hold a very brief, I hope, executive session this evening on a matter of negotiation. The next regularly scheduled city council meeting will be next year, January 5th, 2017, here in City Hall at 7:30 p.m. Other upcoming meetings starting this year are Tuesday, December 13th at 10 a.m. is Blighted Property, and at 6:30 p.m. is Harb. Monday, the 26th of December, City Hall will be closed, as it will be on Monday, January 2nd, and then we get back to work on the 5th. That brings us to the end of our agenda this evening. Do I have comments from my colleagues on council? Mr. Allison.
I have one comment regarding decorations. First of all, the person responsible for decorating our city council chambers, has taken that responsibility. Our clerk, Janice Frank.
Has embraced that
Yes,
responsibility.
right. It wasn't part of the job description, but she does a wonderful job, and we appreciate it every year. And I also appreciate, and I'm sure we all do, those of our citizens who take the time and effort to decorate their homes and add to the holiday spirit and the beauty of our city. So thanks to all those who make it a delight to drive around and to do our business at City Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Allison. Other comments or questions? Hearing none, Mayor or your administration? Mr. Nichols?
Found out, Joe did a lot of research and found out who the outside salespersons are. And it's council, no.
Who
it's,
is it?
It's a codes department. Codes. Codes falls under that category.
Oh, codes does. So they're going to be,
Outside,
they're going to be selling the city then, correct?
yes.
Selling the assets of the
Yes,
city.
Right.
They do go door to door.
They do go door to door. Yeah.
Okay.
We didn't want to leave you in suspense.
Thank you for that, Mr. Nichols and Mr. Pavlik. Are there any other comments from the administration? Mr. Mayor.
Good evening, Dr. President, Mr. Vice President, members of City Council. I am pleased to introduce that we have a new HR director. Her name is Lily King, and at this time, Lily's going to introduce herself to you.
Welcome, Ms. King.
Thank you. I really don't know what to say because this is my first time ever attending a city council meeting, so maybe as soon as I get my feet wet a little bit. I will be starting on January the 3rd.
Okay.
I'm really excited to work for the city of Williamsport. I think it's going to be a great transition for me. I'm coming from the medical field in the HR, so this is going to be different. My background has always been in manufacturing, and then I went to school and became a nurse and ended up back in the HR realm, and now I am back in a different type of HR. But I'm really excited about working and starting here with everyone. So I'm hoping that everyone can turn to me.
Well, thank you very much, and it's very nice to meet you. We know that it's a challenging time in the HR industry, and you know, that affects the city as it does many employers to figure out new rules under new laws and to make sure that the needs of our employees and the needs of our bosses, the taxpayers, are both met at the same time. So I think, speaking on behalf of my colleagues, we look forward to working with you and finding collaborative solutions to some of those challenges that you'll help us work through.
I have been learning HR for about 30 years, and I'm continuing to learn. So any help that I can get from anyone is really highly appreciated.
Well, thank you for joining the team.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any comments from the general public? None?
Only that December 13th has already passed.
It sure has. Oh, those are, I'm sorry, the dates for Harb and blighted property are December 20th. Sorry, you get to reading and you miss things. And let me just say thank you to everybody for your hard work this year. A lot of challenges faced, many of them overcome, many to come in the future. And let me wish, on behalf of myself and my colleagues, everyone to have a Merry Christmas or any of the holidays that are important to you in the coming days. And definitely a Happy New Year. With that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.